Do you want to go ahead with your question?
Sure. Joe, when you spoke earlier, you talked about the changing role of the educator and how the educator is sort of, to some degree, a community leader at the center and is supported by other community leaders. And we talk about the changing role of the educator so that they are very knowledgeable in the content areas, very sensitive and understanding in how to work with children of special needs, et cetera. So we're talking about more and more and more capabilities of the classroom teacher and how we're expanding the role and putting higher and higher expectations of performance. And it seems to me in a lot of the meetings we've been at, including this one, which has been terrific, we're doing it in the absence of any of the teaching colleges and having them participate in the dialogue of how we would go about preparing educators to want those roles, or potential educators to want those roles, and how we would go about preparing people to take those roles. So what I'd like to know is how, particularly those of you in the unions and in positions of authority, formal authority, if you will, are addressing getting the teaching colleges engaged in a meaningful conversation where they participate in understanding, crafting, and modifying curriculum in the ed schools.
Thank you. Okay. Barnett.
Well, I'm going to quickly jump in. Two things. One, I'm proud to say that Bank Street College is very interested in this work, and we're going to be spending some time with them with the content of the book and how to drive the future of teacher education. I'm proud that Jose, who's in New York, and Ariel Sachs, who's also one of our team members who's in New York City, will be working with us to help move that ed school forward. And also, we will have a major forum at AACTE, thanks to Sharon Robinson, to really push ed school deans to start thinking about this new vision for the future of teaching and the ed schools.
Anybody else want to respond to that? Go ahead, John.
Just an underutilized lever is the tool of accreditation, national accreditation, and that is that if institutions want to become nationally accredited, that they will have to meet particular standards as it relates to all of the issues that we've talked about. The reality is that there are lots of institutions around the country that are not nationally accredited, and nobody even knows whether it matters or not, and people get hired left and right, but there is no system. In other professions, that's not the case. You don't go to unaccredited medical schools or law schools. In the case of education, it's a whole different world, and so it is a tool that could be used as a lever in order to make the kinds of changes that we're talking about.
Did you have a comment? Yes, go ahead.
First of all, I want to say to the teachers on the panel, thank you for bringing such powerful and compelling portraits of practice to this session. And you really, reminded us all that we talk about teaching, we talk about technology, because learning and learners look very differently. And you've given us a great glimpse into the future. So it triggered this thought that around the corner there's another conversation going on, and it's with the Council of Chief State School Officers, and they're talking about new standards of practice. So I looked at your levers, and I think you might have left off a lever for change, which would be, are there new standards of practice that would define the kind of that would define the preparation, that would sort of inform the professional development, the accreditation, that need to be created so that we really do use the teacher entrepreneurs to create what I think is going to be a new learning profession, more so than a teaching profession. So I'm wondering if you have, like, top of mind, 3 core skills, knowledge. You talked about, rooted in caring relationships. You talked about your student. You talked about content. What are 3 new standards of practice that you think should drive a lot of this work and the profession and preparation going forward?
I guess I'll speak a little bit to it. I will say this. When I was prepared to become a New York City teaching fellow and I got into the program, I didn't feel that I was as prepared as I should have been, to be quite honest. And it has a lot to do with that thought process. Like, who was there every step of the way as far as, like, who made the policy to get me into the program? Then who made the policy to get the teachers to teach me how to teach? And then from there, like, who made the policy to get the schools set up in such a way where I have a supportive team? Now, I felt I had a pretty supportive team once I got into the school. But the one thought that I would say is really we need to think about how teachers are selected to begin with. And I guess that's the one thing I always harp on. I can't say about the other two. But how teachers are selected is so important because, and again, this is me being honest, the first time I applied for the teaching fellows, I wasn't really accepted. And it took a little while for them to say, you know what, we'll let you in. And as it turns out, I've lasted longer than most of my cohort members at the time. So what does that say about how they select teachers, how they identify what are the things that make a passionate teacher or someone who's a competent teacher? That's a rubric that hasn't been developed thoroughly yet. Some people are doing that work. I believe John Safir, for one, has been doing that sort of thing. Obviously, our team, Brian and Barry, has been doing that sort of thing as well. I've seen some articles in the NEA as well, which I'm appreciative of every month or so. But more than anything, we really need to look at how it is that we identify those people who can best fit whatever community they're in. Because there could be we could have a candidate who's very good, but they may not be very good for the place that they were placed at. Oftentimes, we have teachers who, they may have a 3.9 coming out of college. They may have gone to a very prestigious college and have come from a really strong background and whatever, very successful. But once they hit that classroom, it's a whole different animal. And who are they to say that these 30 students are what's needed for this particular teacher and vice versa? So that maybe that's something that we need to discuss even before we even get into that standard of teaching is what kind of standard do we have for that particular community? Who do we put in there? Not necessarily, race-based or, but more experiential-based. Like how is that person going to be able to affect those 30, 60, 90, 150, and I've seen 150 students in that particular spot? I mean, that's a huge deal, and it hasn't been talked about enough.
I just want to make one point, because Jose talked about the selection, right? But then once we've selected them, Martin Haberman, in one of his research pieces, talk about that if you don't prepare to swim the English Channel by swimming in an Olympic-sized pool at the Y. So once we've selected them, they need to swim in the English Channel. And programs like our residency, our urban teacher residency at the Academy for Urban School Leadership, our residents swim in the English Channel because they're going to go teach in the English Channel. And so why should their preparation take place in the suburbs in Winnetka when they're going to go teach at a school whose current meets and exceeds is at 20%? So you should be prepared where you're going to be to understand the community, the needs of the community, the needs of the families, and the needs of the students, and what you're going to have to bring to the table as a teacher in order to be successful for them, for that particular context, for that particular time.